When Richie Incognito drew lines between Cleveland and franchises like Kansas City, Baltimore, and San Francisco, it wasn't to praise them, it was to shame the Browns. While those teams build through foresight and cohesion, the Browns, in his view, draft like they're picking names out of a bingo cage. Selection became the poster child for a system that values nothing but gut instinct and guesswork.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Meanwhile, proven talents like Shedeur Sanders are left on the board, casualties of a culture that refuses to. That contrast isn't just embarrassing, it's damning. By framing Cleveland's chaos next to successful organizations, Incognito forces a question. Why do other teams get it right while the Browns keep spiraling? The answer, he suggests, lies not in luck or bad breaks, but in leadership that's allergic to accountability and allergic to change. Richie Incognito has had it with the Cleveland Browns. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. In a fiery rant that spread across sports media and social platforms like wildfire, the former NFL lineman absolutely torched the Browns for one of the most baffling quarterback decisions in recent memory, sticking with Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. And no, this wasn't a mild critique or a diplomatic. Let's see how it plays out. Incognito dropped the hammer with the kind of unfiltered intensity that only comes from someone who's watched enough dysfunction to recognize it from miles. Because let's be real, this wasn't just about Gabriel versus Sanders. This was about everything that led to that decision. The front office confusion, the leadership carousel, the scouting department that somehow treats talent evaluation like a randomized Madden simulation. Incognito wasn't just calling out a bad pick. He was exposing a franchise that keeps choosing chaos over clarity, like it's a brand strategy. And what stung the most? He wasn't wrong. Incognito's takedown started with a simple question. What are the Browns doing? Because when you look at the numbers, the rankings, the potential, Shedeur Sanders was sitting right there. A quarterback with pedigree, poise, and performance under pressure. The son of Deion Sanders, coached by one of the sharpest minds in college football and tested in high-stakes games every week. He was available. He was qualified. And the Browns said no. Instead, they rolled with Gabriel, a quarterback with a lower draft profile, less buzz, and a skill set that didn't exactly scream franchise cornerstone. And this isn't to knock Gabriel personally. It's to question why, in yet another critical moment, the Browns did what the Browns always do, go left when logic says right. And that's where Incognito hit hardest, because it's not just one pick, it's a pattern. He laid out a timeline of dysfunction, calling out the Browns' inability to build around any consistent strategy, quarterback selections that never pan out, coaching hires that flame out in record time, a front office that talks about long-term vision while making decisions that reek of panic. And somehow, every few years, they reboot the whole thing under a new slogan, expecting fans and analysts to buy back, and like the last 5 restarts didn't happen. According to Incognito, this is exactly why the Browns keep circling the same drain. They don't operate like a professional football organization. They operate like a chaotic startup, loud, impulsive, and constantly one bad decision away from total collapse. He described the team's draft room as a daycare center, mocking the level of disorganization he sees in how decisions get made. And he wasn't just being dramatic. His whole point was that while elite franchises like Kansas City, Baltimore, and San Francisco are building chessboards, Cleveland is still spinning a wheel. The Browns aren't lacking talent. They're lacking direction. And direction starts at the top. That's where Incognito focused next. Leadership, ownership, management, coaching. He didn't spare anyone. Because you can't blame just a quarterback, or just the scouts, or just the media. At some point, the culture of incompetence has to land where it belongs, with the people in charge. Incognito argued that the Browns have become a case study in how not to run a franchise. They had talent. They've had draft picks. They've had moments. But because they don't know how to string them together, they've ended up turning every potential turning point into another footnote in a saga of failure. And that brings us back to Shedeur. This wasn't just a miss. It was a statement. A signal that the team still doesn't know how to identify and develop elite talent. While other franchises were reportedly eyeing Sanders as a future face of their team, the Browns pass him over. Not for a sure thing, but for another gamble in a long line of them. To Incognito, that showed everything you need to know about Cleveland's priorities. They didn't want upside. They wanted control. They didn't want a new direction. They wanted something predictable. Even if predictable means mediocre. The problem? Mediocre doesn't win in this league. Strategic risk does. Taking swings on players with star potential, investing in their development, and creating a system that supports growth. That's what teams like Baltimore and Kansas City are doing. That's what wins. And that's exactly what the Browns are refusing to do. And the fans know it. That's what made Incognito's rant hit so hard. Because he wasn't just speaking as a former player. He was voicing the collective exhaustion of every Cleveland fan who's been promised change and served the same dysfunction in a different jersey. He described the Browns as a franchise that keeps rebuilding chaos, a phrase that went viral because of how perfectly it captured the cycle. Crash, burn, reset, there's no plan. There's no accountability. Just another season of wait and see. Another press conference full of vague optimism. Another quarterback thrown into the deep end with no real infrastructure to support them. Incognito drew a sharp contrast with the teams that do have a plan. He praised franchises that build from the top down, where leadership communicates a clear vision, and where every move aligns with that vision. He said the Browns are the opposite, reactive, erratic, and more focused on PR wins than actual progress. He mocked the idea that Cleveland's scouting process was based on deep analysis. According to him, it's more like guessing games and gut feelings. A Madden ratings approach, where picks are made based on flash, not foundation. And over time, those kinds of decisions don't just fail, they break teams from the inside. He also pointed to the media response, how fans and pundits didn't just disagree with the pick, they roasted it. Memes, hot takes, threads, debates. The internet lit up the moment Cleveland's choice was announced. And that's not because people hate Dylan Gabriel. It's because they've seen this before. A quarterback with little upside thrown into a firestorm of organizational chaos. A front office acting like the move is revolutionary, while everyone else braces for another disaster. It's not hard to see why Incognito's words went viral. He didn't just rant. He said everything the fan base has been screaming into the void. The Browns are stuck. And until they stop repeating the same script, nothing will change. So what now? Another season of managing expectations? Another quarterback learning on the fly in a broken system? Another year of blaming the players while the front office pretends it's all part of the long-term vision? Incognito made it clear this isn't about hating the Browns. It's about calling out a team that refuses to grow, that refuses to learn, that's more committed to maintaining dysfunction than fixing it. And if you're a Browns fan, you have every right to be furious. You've been told to trust the process, only to find out there is no process. Just vibes, mistakes, and more rebuilds. And now, the one quarterback who actually looked like a franchise centerpiece was left on the board. Again. Let us know where you stand. Was this just another draft day disaster? Or is there hope the Browns might finally see the writing on the wall? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share if you're tired of seeing talent wasted. Hit like if you've lost count of how many times this team has restarted. And subscribe if you want to stay up to date on the chaos. Because something tells us this story isn't over. And here's the thing that really makes this whole situation hit a nerve. This was supposed to be the turning point. All the talk leading up to the draft was about evolution, growth, stability, a culture reset. After years of being the NFL's cautionary tale, the Browns had a chance to prove they'd learned something. Anything. But when they got a fork in the road, when Shedeur Sanders was still on the board, they didn't just make a bad call. They made the same call. And that's what Richie Incognito snapped over. Because this wasn't just about one draft. It was about a franchise that keeps hitting the self-destruct button and pretending it's a reboot. A team that keeps choosing low-ceiling comfort over high-ceiling risk, like they're allergic to ambition, like they're scared of what would happen if they actually tried to win long-term. Because drafting Shedeur Sanders wouldn't have just been a quarterback move. It would have been a cultural move. It would have been a message. A signal that this time, the Browns weren't just swapping players. They were flipping the script, building around someone dynamic, Someone with leadership charisma and pressure-tested pedigree. A quarterback who's been living in the spotlight since high school and thriving in it. Instead, they went with Dylan Gabriel, a guy whose college resume doesn't scream franchise quarterback and whose draft stock didn't exactly have teams fighting over him. A guy who might be competent, sure, but who doesn't change your ceiling or your reputation. And Incognito knew it wasn't about the name. It was about what that name represented. More of the same. Another year. Another average plan pretending to be elite strategy. Another Browns pick that felt like it came from a room full of people who don't actually agree on what they're trying to... He said it plain as day. The Browns treat the draft like a roulette table. Spin it. Hope for red. And when it lands on black, just act surprised. And that would be hilarious if it weren't the real blueprint for how they've been running this team. He wasn't laughing to be cute. He was laughing because the absurdity of it all has become the Browns' defining feature. At this point, dysfunction isn't an occasional misstep. It's baked into the identity. A feature, not a bug. He went all in on how the Browns have normalized this pattern. How they've become the only team in the league where dysfunction is expected. Where chaos isn't the fallout from bad decisions. It is a decision. Every time. And fans? They're not fooled anymore. There's no benefit of the doubt left. Not after years of the same recycled press conferences, the same disappointing seasons, the same next guy up mentality that never fixes the root problem. And Richie, with the bluntness only a former lineman can deliver, dragged that all the way into the spotlight. He didn't just critique the pick. He questioned the entire foundation of how the Browns operate, how ownership has allowed a culture of maybe next year to become policy, how leadership refuses to embrace any path that might actually shake things up, how coaching hires, draft picks, and quarterback changes all seem to follow one rule. Don't be bold. Be safe. Be manageable. Be forgettable. But guess what? You don't win rings by being forgettable. You don't build dynasties with the we'll see mentality. And this is why the comparison to other franchises mattered so much. Richie wasn't just name-dropping Baltimore and Kansas City for the sake of flexing. He was contrasting structure with entropy, smart with sloppy, strategic drafting with a front office that treats every offseason like a group project due at midnight. Teams like the Ravens and Chiefs aren't perfect, but they have philosophies. They know what kind of team they are. They know the type of talent they want. And they back up their players with systems that make them better. The Browns, on the other hand, seem to discover their identity halfway through the season, just in time to fire the coach and start over. Incognito called it a daycare center. And let's be real, that hit because it felt earned. Because from the outside, it really does look like no one in that building is in charge. Or at least, no one with a plan that lasts longer than a headline cycle. And every time someone dares to challenge that chaos, every time a player or a commentator or a fan speaks up, the team deflects. They talk about rebuilding. They talk about evaluating talent. They roll out the same generic lines that have been said so many times they should be printed on the stadium walls. That's why the Gabriel pick wasn't just controversial. It was demoralizing, because it told the fan base that even with a golden opportunity to pivot, to grow, to take a real shot at something better, the Browns still chose to play it safe, to choose average, to double down on a strategy that hasn't worked in years. And this is where Richie's rant turns from funny to sobering, because he's not yelling for the sake of it. He's yelling because this is what happens when a franchise refuses to listen to itself, let alone its critics. The Browns have become a team people watch to lose. A punchline. A parody of what an NFL franchise is supposed to look like. And the worst part? They don't even seem bothered by it. But fans? They are bothered. They're tired of being asked to invest emotionally in another rebuild that already looks like a rerun. They're tired of being told to trust the process, when the process clearly hasn't changed. And they're tired of watching the same mistakes get repeated like no one in the building has ever watched game tape. So now what? Does the front office finally wake up? Do they take accountability? Do they stop treating critiques like Richie's as just noise and start realizing their reflection of how the world actually sees this franchise? Or do they keep rolling with Gabriel, hoping no one notices how much they gave up by passing on Shedeur Sanders? Richie was blunt. The Browns are at risk of becoming irrelevant. Not just bad. Irrelevant. A team that exists not to compete, but to entertain through failure. A team that people don't fear, they just laugh at. And that is not what this fan base deserves. Cleveland has diehard fans. Loyal fans. People who show up no matter how many times they've been burned. And what they're asking for isn't a Super Bowl tomorrow. They're asking for clarity. For direction. For signs that the people running this thing are actually trying to fix it. But until that happens, this franchise will keep doing what it always does. Chasing relevance through drama instead of performance. And if you're still waiting for the Browns to respond, don't hold your breath. Because when a former NFL lineman like Richie Incognito goes nuclear on your franchise, dragging every level of your operation on a public stage, you'd think someone from the Browns would step up and say something. Address the criticism. Clarify the plan. Push back, even. But what did we get? Silence. The same deafening silence that fans have gotten year after year. Season after season. When the team makes a move that makes no sense, they don't explain it. They just expect the world to wait and see. And that, more than anything else, is what drives people insane. Because wait and see only works when there's a foundation of trust. When there's a history of success. But the Browns don't have that. What they have is a long track record of rushing decisions, botching quarterback development, and giving fans vague promises while the results speak. And let's not pretend Richie Incognito's words didn't hit where it hurts. When he described the Browns' war room as a daycare center, fans didn't flinch. They nodded. When he said the team's scouting department acts like they're sorting players based on Madden ratings, it wasn't hyperbole. It felt accurate. When he mocked the idea of rebuilding chaos, it stuck because it's exactly what the Browns keep doing. They don't build. They rebuild the rebuild. They don't learn. They repeat the cycle. And now, with Gabriel front and center, a quarterback who, by most accounts, isn't anywhere near the top tiers class, the Browns have painted themselves into a familiar corner. A low-ceiling, low-risk pick that only makes sense if you've completely given up on developing a true franchise player. And yes, maybe Gabriel ends up proving people wrong. Maybe he surprises everyone and becomes a solid starter. That's not impossible. But that's not the point. The point is that the Browns had a choice. And they chose a quarterback that doesn't scare defenses. They chose a player who didn't force them to change the way they build their offense. They chose safety. Predictability. Another guy they can move on from in 2 years without taking too much heat. And in doing so, they passed on Shedeur Sanders, a player who would have brought with him expectations, pressure, and a whole new energy. A player who demands a culture shift. And that's exactly why the Browns avoided him. Because that shift, it would have forced them to change, to commit, to invest in long-term success over short-term survival. And this franchise, time and time again, has shown it doesn't want that kind of accountability. It wants flexibility, the kind that comes with vague answers and easy exits. Richie Incognito said what needed to be said. He didn't care about protecting feelings. He wasn't worried about media spin. He said in plain language that the Browns have no idea what they're doing, that they draft like a team with no long-term strategy, that they build a culture where mistakes aren't corrected, they're repeated. And the wildest part? People agreed with him. Fans didn't rush to defend the front office. They didn't argue that Incognito was out of line. They shared the rant. They laughed because it was all too real. They posted clips of past Browns meltdowns and lined them up like a highlight reel of dysfunction. That's the brand now. A franchise more famous for botched picks and blown seasons than any on-field legacy. And what's next? Another camp battle. Another "we like our guy" press conference. Another 3-game losing streak before the whispers of, should we bench him, start again. The Browns will probably ride this out like they always do, with stubborn optimism and no clear answers. Because they've made mediocrity the expectation. They've made every draft pick feel like a coin toss. And now, even when they do have a shot at real talent, like Shedeur Sanders, they hesitate. They doubt. They talk themselves into a safe bet, and then pretend that was a plan all along. But fans aren't fooled anymore. They've been sold the same vision every year. A rebuild that will finally work. A new quarterback who's the answer. A coaching staff that's building something special. And every year they get the same result. A season that starts with hype and ends in disappointment. With another press conference that sounds exactly like the last one. That's why Richie's words resonated. Because he wasn't just criticizing a pick. He was mourning wasted opportunity. He was holding up a mirror to a team that has somehow normalized failure. A team that refuses to admit it's lost, even as the league passes it by. And now, with a spotlight on Dylan Gabriel, a player who didn't ask to be the symbol of Cleveland's dysfunction, all eyes are on what happens next. Does he rise above the noise? Or does he become the next name added to the long list of quarterbacks who were set up to fail by a franchise that never gave them a real shot? Let us know how you're feeling about all this. Did the Browns make the wrong call? Was Shedeur Sanders the missed opportunity that'll haunt them for years? Or is there still hope for a turnaround? Comment your take below. Like if you're exhausted by the endless cycle. Share if you're still waiting for the front office to get it right. And subscribe to stay locked in. Because if the Browns have taught us anything, it's that drama is the only thing they know how to deliver consistently.